What if a single winter nearly erased humanity from the earth, long before cities' kingdoms or even written history? An ancient climate catastrophe pushed our ancestors to the very edge of extinction. Yet against impossible odds, a handful survived, and their choices may have shaped every human alive today. Tonight we'll journey back into one of the coldest and most mysterious chapters in our past, to uncover how an unforgiving winter rewrote the story of human survival forever. If you enjoy fascinating history and relaxing documentaries, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for many more incredible journeys into humanity's forgotten past. The sky does not turn black all at once. It pales first as if the sun has begun to forget its own strength. Across far valleys, open plains, forest edges and coastlines, where ancient people measure the year by warmth on skin animal tracks in mud, and the flowering of plants' daylight begins to lose its familiar weight. Morning arrives, but it feels unfinished. Shadows remain thin and strange. The horizon carries a washed metallic brightness, and even at midday the world seems to stand beneath a veil. For people who live close to the land, this is not a small change. It is not scenery, it is warning. No one living through such a winter understands it as a global event. There is no map wide enough, no written chronicle in many parts of the world, no instrument waiting patiently to measure dust high above the clouds. There are only signs, smoke-coloured skies, cold winds arriving at the wrong time, animals changing their movements, seeds failing to behave as seeds should, ice lingering where it normally withdraws, rains coming too hard in one place and not at all in another. What survives in the records suggests that ancient communities did not need to know the shape of the whole disaster to feel its pressure. The body understands cold before the mind can explain the atmosphere. Somewhere far from many of the people who suffer from it, the earth has opened. A volcano, or perhaps more than one great volcanic system, has pushed ash, sulfur and pulverized stone into the upper air, with a force that almost escapes human scale. The eruption itself may last hours, days or longer, but its consequences travel beyond sight. The heaviest ash falls nearer the source, choking rivers, burying forests, and turning day into a local nightmare. But the most dangerous part for distant lands is finer and less visible. Sulfur rises into the stratosphere and forms tiny reflective particles that scatter sunlight back towards space. The planet's surface receives less warmth. The change is not evenly distributed, and scholars still debate the exact sequence and intensity of ancient volcanic winters, but the basic mechanism is well understood. The sky becomes a shield against the sun. In the generations before, cities rise into stone and empires carve borders into maps. Human life is already intelligent, social and adaptable, but it is also exposed. Communities survive by reading patterns that have held long enough to become trust. The return of herds across a pass, the ripening of nuts in a familiar grove, the thawing of a river, the nesting of birds, the slow swelling of roots beneath soil. The old people remember lean years, and every group has strategies for hunger, but a failed season is different from a broken climate. A bad winter can be endured when spring arrives faithfully behind it. The ancient winter that rewrites survival is frightening, because spring may arrive in name only. The light changes, the cold lingers, and the rules that have guided memory begin to bend. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The story that follows is not only about catastrophe, it is about the fragile line between disappearance and endurance, and about the deep human talent for surviving a world that suddenly stops making sense. Imagine a small band moving along the edge of a river valley. Their world is not empty wilderness, even if later maps will pretend it was. It is full of known places, a bend where fish gather in certain months, a slope where edible plants push through after thaw, a stone outcrop where good material can be struck into blades, a sheltered hollow where wind loses some of its teeth. The group's knowledge is not written down, but it is dense, practical, and exact. Every scar in a tree, every trail through reeds, every patch of animal dung means something. Survival is not primitive guesswork. It is a library carried in bodies, gestures, habits, and memory. Then the cues begin to fail. A plant that should be appearing remains hidden beneath cold ground. Hoofprints are fewer near a crossing. Birds arrive late or not at all. The river runs strangely swollen by unseasonal melt in one moment, and locked by cold in another. The hunters travel farther and return with less. Children grow quiet around fires that must burn longer than usual. The old people search their memories for a year like this, and find fragments but not a perfect match. The evidence remains incomplete because deep prehistory rarely leaves us the kind of human testimony that later ages do. Yet archaeology, climate science, and biology together allow a haunting reconstruction. When the atmosphere changes, the first archive is hunger. The cold itself is only one part of the danger. A winter can kill by freezing, but it can also kill by rearranging everything that food depends on. Less sunlight means shorter growing seasons. Cooler summers weaken plants. Stressed vegetation affects grazing animals, and stressed herds affect predators and hunters. Snow cover changes the movement of large mammals. Wetlands shift. Rivers become unreliable. In some places, drought follows atmospheric disruption. In others, storms intensify. A volcanic winter is not simply the world becoming colder in a neat, uniform way. It is the world becoming less predictable. For ancient people, unpredictability is often the sharper blade. There is strange cruelty in a dimmed sun. The sun is still there. It rises. It crosses the sky. It stains the clouds at evening. But it gives less than it should. This is what makes the scene so unsettling when imagined from the ground. The disaster does not always arrive as a wall of flame or a towering wave. It can arrive as a subtraction, a little less warmth, a little less growth, a little more distance between one meal and the next, a little more time spent searching, a little more danger in staying where ancestors once stayed safely. Human survival, especially before agriculture and stored grain become widespread in many regions, depends on margins. The ancient winter attacks those margins. No single ancient winter explains all of human history, and no responsible account should pretend that one eruption alone turns scattered societies into the world that follows. Climate is powerful, but it does not act on empty land. It meets people with different technologies, different diets, different social networks, and different landscapes around them. Some groups live near coasts where shellfish fish and marine mammals offer alternatives when inland foods falter. Some live in river valleys with varied resources. Others depend more heavily on migrating herds or seasonal plants. The same atmospheric shock can be survivable in one place and devastating in another. This unevenness is part of the mystery. The ancient winter matters because it exposes something usually hidden beneath normal years. It reveals the structure of survival. Under ordinary conditions, a community's knowledge may seem inseparable from the landscape that produced it. But when the landscape changes, knowledge must become flexible. Tools must be used differently. Routes must shift. Groups must decide when to remain, when to split, when to merge, when to follow animals, when to risk unfamiliar territory, and when to trust strangers. In the cold, culture becomes a survival system. Fire, shelter, clothing, stone, bone, memory, cooperation, and imagination all become part of the same defense against extinction. From the perspective of deep time, the most dramatic thing is not that the world turned hostile. Earth has done that again and again. Ice sheets advance, deserts expand, seas rise, volcanoes darken skies. The more astonishing fact is that humans, fragile as individuals, repeatedly find ways to continue. They do not survive because they are the strongest creatures in the landscape. They survive because they notice, remember, share, adapt, and move. They survive because a child can learn from a grandparent, because one group can borrow from another, because a tool can be remade for a new purpose, because fire can turn a night that should be fatal into a circle of breath and waiting. And so the story begins beneath a weakened sun in a year when the old rhythm falters. The ancient winter is not yet a legend. It is not yet a layer in ice, a narrow ring in a tree, or a puzzle in a scientist's graph. It is a lived season stretching beyond expectation, a pressure pressing into stomachs and settlements, into roots and rituals, into the decisions made before dawn. Somewhere in the distance, ash has already fallen. High above, invisible particles drift through the sky. On the ground, human beings look up at a pale sun and then back toward the land, searching for what can still be eaten, burned, followed, repaired, remembered, and passed on. Long before the ancient winter spreads its pale hand across the world, humanity already lives inside a delicate arrangement of skill, memory, and risk. These are not helpless people wandering through a blank wilderness. They are experts in the places that hold them. They know where stone can be broken cleanly, where dry wood hides beneath snow, where animals cross water when the river is low, and which roots can be eaten only after careful preparation. Their lives are not simple, they are precise. Yet precision is also a kind of dependence, because knowledge grows around patterns, and patterns are exactly what a broken climate begins to disturb. In many regions, human communities are small and scattered. They may move through wide territories in seasonal rounds, returning to places that have proved reliable across generations. A campsite is not just a campsite. It is a stored memory in the landscape. A sheltered rock face, a bend in a river, a line of trees beside open grass, a ridge where animals can be seen from far away, a beach where shellfish remain after the tide withdraws. Such places form an invisible map, carried in the minds of people who may never draw it. The map is made of timing as much as distance. A place can be generous in one season and nearly useless in another. Survival depends on arriving when the world is ready. This is why an ordinary cold year can become frightening without looking spectacular. A late thaw can mean a group reaches a valley before the plants emerge. Heavy snow can push animals away from old roots. A wet season can flood low camps. A dry season can empty streams and shrink the ponds that draw game. Human beings can adjust to variation, and they have been doing so for a very long time, but their adjustments depend on a range of expectations. When climate strays beyond that range, the old calendar loses authority. The group may still remember where food should be, but the land no longer keeps its appointment. The human world before the catastrophe is also not one world. It is a mosaic. Some communities live near coastlines where the sea provides a wider menu, and sometimes cushions people against inland failure. Shellfish, fish, seabirds, stranded animals, seaweed, and coastal plants can create a kind of backup system. Though even coasts have dangers of storms, exposure, and changing sea levels. Other communities live in open steppe or grassland, following herd animals and reading the movements of horse, bison, reindeer, antelope, or other prey depending on region and period. Still others move between woodland and water, drawing on nuts, roots, small animals, fish, and birds. The exact details vary across time and place, and the evidence remains incomplete. But the broader pattern is clear. Humans survive by widening possibility. That widening is not only about food, it is about tools. Stone blades, scrapers, points, awls, digging sticks, nets, baskets, hides, cords and containers all matter because they convert effort into options. A sharp edge means meat can be processed quickly before scavengers arrive. A scraper means hides can become warmer coverings. A needle or awl means clothing can fit more closely around the body. A container means food, water embers, pigments, or medicines can be carried rather than consumed on the spot. These things may appear humble beside later monuments, but in a hard climate, a fitted garment or a reliable carrying bag can matter more than a palace. Fire is central, but not in the simple way often imagined. It is warmth, yes, and light in the long dark. It keeps predators at a distance and makes some food safer or more digestible. It dries wet materials, hardens wooden points, transforms stone in certain traditions, and creates social time after sunset. Around fire tasks continue when the sky goes dark. Tools are repaired. Children watch hands and learn sequences. Older people tell what happened in lean seasons before. Fire turns night into a room, and the room becomes a school. In a severe winter, that social meaning of fire may be as important as the heat itself. The fragile human world also depends on relationships beyond the immediate family. Even small bands are rarely sealed units drifting alone forever. Archaeological traces of raw materials transported over long distances suggest movement exchange or contact across broad landscapes. Ornaments, pigments, distinctive tool styles, and shared techniques hint at networks that may stretch farther than daily life. Scholars still debate how frequent and structured these interactions were in different regions, but the basic idea is hard to avoid. People meet other people. They exchange partner stories, objects, warnings, and sometimes conflict. In ordinary years, such networks may enrich life. In crisis years, they may decide who survives. A group that knows only one valley is vulnerable if that valley fails. A group with remembered ties beyond the valley may have somewhere to go, or at least some knowledge of where not to go. This does not mean ancient life is peacefully cooperative in every moment. Scarcity can sharpen suspicion. Strangers can be dangerous. A hungry band entering another group's territory might be seen as a threat, especially if animals are already scarce. Yet the deep record of human survival suggests that connection repeatedly offers advantages. Information can move faster than bodies. A rumour of herds beyond the ridge, a memory of a cave that stays dry, a technique for catching fish under ice, a plant used by neighbours during hunger, such things can become lifelines. Children live inside this fragile world as both vulnerability and future strength. They require care, warmth, food, and protection for many years, far longer than many other young animals. That prolonged childhood is costly in hard times, but it also creates an astonishing learning system. Human children absorb landscapes slowly. They watch how adults test stone track animals, gather plants, judge weather, and divide food. They learn not merely by being told, but by seeing 1,000 repeated acts. When crisis comes, the survival of children depends on the group, and the survival of the group depends on what children eventually remember. The human species carries its future in dependents who cannot yet fend for themselves, which makes cooperation less sentimental than necessary. Older adults also matter in ways that are easy to underestimate. In purely physical terms, a younger hunter or gatherer may travel faster and carry more. But survival is not only strength, it is comparison. An elder may remember a drought from childhood, a winter when animals stayed lower than usual, a plant that became important when larger prey disappeared a safe route through unstable ground, or a story of a distant people who once offered shelter. The evidence for the role of elders in deep prehistory is indirect, but modern hunter-gatherer studies and archaeological reasoning both suggest that stored experience can be invaluable. A long life becomes a climate archive with a pulse. The ancient winter, therefore, does not strike a blank species. It strikes a species already equipped with fire tools, language, memory, social bonds, and a restless ability to move through many environments. But it also strikes a species with limits. A body needs calories. A child needs protection. A hearth needs fuel. A group needs enough successful days to reach the next season. The brilliance of human adaptation does not erase danger. It only creates more ways to negotiate with it. As the sky dims and the seasons begin to misbehave, all these quiet systems are tested at once. The stone tools still cut, the fires still burn, the elders still remember, the old roots still exist beneath snow and shadow. Yet each familiar strength must now answer a harder question. Can knowledge built for one world survive when that world changes beneath it? The ancient winter will not simply punish weakness. It will reveal which habits can bend without breaking, which communities can widen their circle, and which landscapes still hold enough generosity to keep human breath moving through the cold. The force behind an ancient winter begins in a place where ordinary human senses cannot remain for long. It begins under pressure beneath mountains or islands or fractured continental ground, where molten rock gathers in hidden chambers and gases wait inside it like a trapped storm. For years, centuries, or even longer, the system may seem almost still. Forests grow on its slopes, rivers cut through old ash, animals graze where earlier eruptions once burned the land clean. People may pass near it, gather stone from its older flows, shelter in its valleys, or avoid it because the ground smells strange and hot, springs breathe through cracks. A volcano can look like landscape until it stops behaving like landscape. When a great eruption comes, it is not merely an explosion of fire. It is the sudden release of a deep geological argument between rock gas, water, and pressure. Magma rises. The gases dissolved within it expand violently. If water is involved, whether from a lake-sea glacier or underground source, the violence can become sharper still. Stone is shattered into ash. Columns of debris climb into the sky. The eruption column may rise far above weather systems, punching through the lower atmosphere and reaching into the stratosphere where winds can carry fine particles around the planet. Near the volcano, devastation can be immediate and almost total. Farther away, the disaster becomes more subtle, and in some ways more unsettling, because it continues after the mountain has grown quiet. The ash that falls nearby can bury plants, collapse, shelters, poison water, and grind between teeth. It turns daylight thick and dirty. It settles on fur feathers, leaves, and open eyes. It can make grazing land useless and rivers cloudy with abrasive silt. Yet ash alone, for all its terror, is not usually the main engine of a long volcanic winter across distant continents. The colder and wider change comes largely from sulfur gases. When sulfur dioxide rises high enough, it reacts in the atmosphere and forms sulfate aerosols, tiny reflective droplets that linger above the weather. These particles scatter sunlight before it reaches the surface. The sun still rises, but the planet receives less of it. The effect can cool large regions for months or years, depending on the size, chemistry, height, and timing of the eruption. This is the strange reach of volcanic power. A mountain in one region can disturb harvests, winters, rainfall, and human movement far beyond the lands that ever see its ash. Ancient people would not know that a distant eruption had placed a thin veil around the world. They would know only that the light is wrong, the cold persists, and the old signs are less trustworthy. The evidence remains incomplete for many ancient events because eruptions do not always leave easy fingerprints, and several eruptions can overlap in the climate record. Scholars still debate which specific volcanic systems caused certain ancient cooling episodes, how severe the effects were in different regions, and how directly those effects altered human societies. But the broad physics of volcanic winter is no mystery. Earth can cool itself by throwing part of itself into the sky. The most powerful eruptions do not need to cover the whole world in ash to change the whole world's mood. They need to inject enough sulfur into the right layer of atmosphere. In the lower atmosphere, particles and gases are more quickly washed out by rain and snow. In the stratosphere above much of the weather, they can remain longer, spreading thinly across hemispheres. This creates a dimming that is often uneven. Some places may cool sharply. Others experience changes in monsoon patterns, drought, frost storm tracks, or unusual rains. The word winter can mislead if it suggests only snow and ice. A volcanic winter can mean cold summers, failed, growing seasons, weakened sunlight, strange skies, altered rainfall, and a food web pushed out of rhythm. A lesser-known detail is that the timing of an eruption can matter almost as much as its size. If the atmospheric veil forms before or during a growing season, plants may lose the warmth and light they need at the worst possible moment. If cooling alters, snowmelt rivers may rise or fall at unusual times. If sea surface temperatures shift, rain belts can move. For people depending on wild resources, even small timing changes can have large consequences. A herd arriving late can mean a camp runs out of stored fat. A plant maturing under weak sunlight may produce fewer seeds, smaller tubers, or less reliable fruit. In a world without supermarkets, delayed abundance is sometimes indistinguishable from absence. Some volcanic eruptions also bring a second form of atmospheric disturbance, dry fog. Historical accounts from later literate societies describe hazy skies, reddened suns, cold summers, and crop failures after large eruptions. Deep prehistory leaves no written witnesses in many places, but ice cores, tree rings, lake sediments, and cave deposits offer other forms of testimony. They do not speak in human voices, yet they preserve traces of chemistry, growth, and stress. In ice, sulfate spikes can mark the arrival of volcanic aerosols. In trees, narrow rings can record a season too cold or dim for normal growth. In sediments, ash layers can identify specific eruptions if their chemistry matches a known source. No single archive is perfect. Together they turn a vanished sky into something that can be studied. The eruption behind the ancient winter may therefore be imagined in two different scales at once. At the local scale it is noise, darkness, falling ash, collapsing slopes, boiling flows, and landscapes remade with terrifying speed. At the planetary scale it is silence, dim light, slow cooling, and a gradual tightening of hunger. One is theatrical, the other is patient. The patient disaster often travels farther. It does not need people to see the volcano. It only needs them to live beneath the altered sky. For human communities, the hardest part is that the cause is hidden. A predator can be tracked. A storm can be watched from the horizon. A flood leaves mud against trees and debris in branches. But a stratospheric veil has no edge that a person can walk around. It has no scent once it has spread far enough, no footprint in snow, no single direction from which it comes. People may create explanations from the traditions available to them, perhaps linking the dimness to spirits, ancestral, warnings, seasonal disorder, or memories of smoke and fire. It would be wrong to invent exact beliefs where no evidence survives, but it would also be wrong to imagine ancient people merely confused. They observe carefully, they compare, they respond. They may not know the chemical name of sulfur dioxide, yet they know when the world's behavior has changed. The volcano's true power lies in how it breaks distance. A community may live hundreds or thousands of miles from the eruption and still suffer its consequences. A child born near a quiet river may grow hungry because a mountain beyond all known travel has darkened the upper air. A hunter may find fewer animals because vegetation has weakened under a sun he cannot accuse. A family may abandon a familiar shelter because fuel and food no longer balance the demands of the cold. The eruption is geological, but its meaning becomes human only when it reaches the hearth. And once the sky has been altered, the ancient winter no longer belongs to the volcano alone. It belongs to every river that freezes too long, every animal trail that empties every seed that waits in cold soil, every exhausted group deciding whether to remain or move. The mountain may fall silent, but the atmosphere keeps carrying its message. Across distant lands, people look at a pale sun and feel the season turning against them, unaware that high above their heads, the smallest particles have become the largest force in their world. The first sign that the seasons have broken may not be cold itself, but confusion. Cold has a place in the year. Snow has a season. Frost has an expected hour. Ancient people know hardship, and many live with winter as a familiar adversary, a force to be prepared for, respected and outlasted. But this new pattern does not arrive with the discipline of ordinary winter. It lingers when it should loosen. It returns after warmth has seemed to promise relief. It touches the edge of summer. It changes the taste of rain and the timing of rivers. It makes the familiar calendar feel like a tool from another world. In landscapes where grasses normally rise thick after thaw, the ground remains dull and slow. Shoots appear late, and some do not appear at all. Plants that do grow may remain smaller, tougher, less nourishing, as if the earth has become reluctant. In woodland, leaves unfold under a weaker sun, and the canopy may seem thinner than memory expects. Nuts and fruits where they exist become unreliable. Flowers open late, confusing insects whose own rhythms depend on temperature and light. The change is not a single dramatic failure everywhere, but a series of small missed appointments. Nature still moves, but its steps are uneven. For animals, these missed appointments matter. Herds depend on green flushes, fresh browse, thawed water, safe calving grounds, and seasonal corridors. If the plants are late, animals may linger elsewhere or arrive in poor condition. If snow remains deep in high ground, roots close. If rivers swell at strange times, crossings become dangerous. If ice forms and breaks unpredictably, both animals and hunters face new risks. A herd that once passed near a known camp may shift by many miles, and for people waiting with sharpened points, planned fires, and stored memory, those miles can become hunger. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives in bones, settlement patterns, and environmental records suggests that climate stress can ripple quickly through the relationship between humans and prey. The cold summer is especially dangerous because it hides inside a season normally associated with repair. Winter consumes stored energy. Spring and summer restore it. They bring growth, fatten animals, fill nests, open water, and allow people to gather dry smoke, cache, mend, and prepare. If summer itself weakens, the whole year becomes unbalanced. A cold winter after a rich summer is difficult. A cold winter after a poor summer is something else. It is not one bad season anymore. It is debt carried into darkness. Rainfall becomes another kind of uncertainty. A volcanic disturbance can shift atmospheric circulation, altering where rain falls and where it fails. Some regions may become wetter, with persistent storms turning ground to mud, flooding camps, rotting stored materials, and making travel exhausting. Other regions may dry out shrinking wetlands and forcing animals toward fewer water sources where competition grows sharper. A dry cold can be as deadly as a wet cold. The land may look open, but the resources pull away. No single explanation fully accounts for every regional effect of ancient volcanic cooling, yet the larger pattern is clear enough. When the upper air changes, the lower world is rearranged. In colder regions, snow and ice become both obstacle and archive. Snow can preserve tracks, making animals easier to follow, but it can also conceal hazards, cover edible plants, and demand costly movement. Every step through deep snow burns energy. Every delay exposes fingers, feet, and faces to damage. Ice over water can create routes where none existed before, but thin or unstable ice can kill quickly. A frozen river may help a group cross, while a river breaking under an early thaw may trap them on the wrong side. In such conditions, survival depends not on bravery but on judgment, and judgment becomes harder when old experience no longer predicts new behavior. Farther south or in milder zones, the crisis may look less like frozen ground and more like a dimming of abundance. The difference matters because human hardship does not always leave obvious traces. A coastal group may continue to find shellfish, but storms may make collection more dangerous. A woodland group may still gather plants, but the yield may shrink enough to increase travel and tension. Hunters may still kill animals, but the animals may carry less fat, and fat is crucial. Meat alone cannot always sustain people through extreme exertion and cold. Fat marrow organs, nuts, oily fish, and other dense foods can decide whether a group merely eats or truly survives. One surprising detail in the study of past survival is how often the hidden value of fat shapes human choices. Calories are not equal when the body is cold. Fuel becomes a second food. A fire must be fed, and in a prolonged cold period the demand for wood, dung, peat, bone, or other burnable material rises. A campsite that once worked for a short stay may become impractical if nearby fuel runs out. Wet wood smokes and resists flame. Snow-covered wood takes time to gather. Open landscapes may offer little shelter and less fuel. People can carry embers, plan camp locations around resources, and use windbreaks wisely, but the cold expands every task. The need for warmth reaches into movement, settlement, and social organization. A group that cannot afford enough fire may have to move even if food remains nearby. The human body reads these changes without poetry. Hands stiffen. Sleep becomes shallow. Hunger sharpens tempers. Children need more warmth than adults can easily spare. The elderly carry knowledge, but their bodies may suffer first. Injuries that would heal in easier times become threats. A twisted ankle can turn disastrous when food lies far away. Smoke from constant fires irritates eyes and lungs, yet the alternative is worse. Clothing becomes damp and heavy if it cannot be dried. Tools break at inconvenient moments. The ordinary maintenance of life grows heavier and the weight is cumulative. Still, ancient communities do not simply collapse at the first sign of hardship. They experiment. They shift camp earlier than usual. They follow a river farther. They dig deeper for roots. They break bones more thoroughly for marrow. They spend longer at coasts, caves, wetlands, or sheltered valleys. They hunt smaller animals when large game becomes unreliable. They preserve what can be preserved and abandon what costs too much. Some choices are successful. Others may fail quietly, leaving little trace beyond an absence in the record. Scholars still debate how sharply specific ancient winters affected population size or movement, because human evidence from deep time is scattered and often difficult to connect directly to climate events. Yet even uncertainty points toward a central truth. A broken season forces decisions. The most haunting part of this turning point is that it changes time itself. Not cosmic time, but human time. The day becomes a calculation of warmth. The week becomes a measure of how far food can be stretched. The season becomes a question that no one can answer with confidence. A group may wait for the old signs to return, and when they do not, waiting becomes dangerous. The land is still the same land in shape, but not in behavior. The valley remains. The river remains. The ridge remains. Yet the relationships that made them dependable have frayed. So the ancient winter deepens not as a single frozen image, but as a slow unravelling of trust. The sun rises pale. The summer underperforms. The animals alter their routes. The plants hesitate. Rivers misbehave. Fires demand more fuel. Bodies burn more energy. Every familiar place now carries a question beneath it. Can it still keep people alive? In that question, the disaster becomes more than weather. It becomes a test of memory, mobility, cooperation, and imagination, and the people standing under the dim sky must begin to discover whether survival means holding on to what they know or letting the changed world teach them something new. When familiar food sources begin to fail, survival becomes less a matter of strength than of attention. The people at the edge of the ancient winter do not face a single enemy that can be confronted and defeated. They face absence. Fewer tracks in the mud, fewer birds on the water, fewer roots worth digging from cold soil, less fat beneath the skin of animals that are still alive but no longer generous. Absence is difficult to fight because it does not announce itself in one place. It spreads through days. It appears in the length of a search in the silence after hunters return in the smaller portions, passed around a fire, in the decision to eat something usually left for harder times. A family or small band living through this pressure must constantly decide how much energy to spend in the hope of gaining more. A long walk might find a herd beyond the ridge, or it might burn the calories needed to survive the night. Digging through frozen ground might reveal edible roots, or it might only leave hands numb and tools damaged. Following a river might lead to fish, waterfowl, and shelter, or it might draw the group into another people's territory. There is no perfect choice. Ancient survival is often imagined as instinctive, but in a crisis it becomes strategic. Each movement carries risk, and doing nothing is also a movement toward hunger. The first adaptation may be patience, but patience has limits. People wait for a thaw that does not come properly. They watch the sky for signs of warmth. They return to a grove where previous generations gathered food and find the yield thin. They look for the old animal paths and see only scattered evidence, as if the herd has become a rumour. At first the group may stretch its habits. Camps are occupied longer or abandoned sooner. Hunting ranges widen. Gathering becomes more experimental. Children and older adults may stay near shelter while stronger members travel farther, but separation has dangers of its own. A group divided to cover more ground may also become a group easier to lose. As hunger deepens, the menu changes. This is one of the most important and least glamorous truths of human survival. People do not endure only by finding dramatic new abundance. Often they endure by accepting smaller, tougher, stranger, more labour-intensive foods. They scrape lichens or inner bark where suitable. They gather seeds that require long processing. They dig for roots in places once considered marginal. They break bones into smaller fragments to extract marrow and grease. They trap small animals, collect eggs when available, search for insects or larvae in warmer seasons, and pay closer attention to aquatic foods if water remains open. Not all these practices apply everywhere, and the evidence varies by region, but the principle is widely supported. When preferred foods fail, human beings broaden the definition of food. This broadening requires knowledge, and knowledge is never evenly distributed. One person may know which bitter plant can be made edible after soaking or heating. Another may know where fish gather beneath the ice or in slow pools. Someone else may remember that a certain bird nests later in colder years, or that animals pushed by snow sometimes use a lower pass. In such a world, the difference between wisdom and superstition is not always visible from far away, but on the ground repeated observation matters. Some remedies fail, some signs mislead, some inherited rules no longer fit the altered season. Still, a community with many memories has more chances than a community depending on one narrow routine. Tools become extensions of adaptation. A blade made for butchering large game can also process smaller animals. Scrapers prepare hides that must now be warmer, better fitted, and repaired more often. Points may be redesigned, resharpened, or mounted differently depending on prey. Digging tools become more valuable when plant foods matter more. Containers gain importance when food must be carried farther or saved longer. Nets, snares, traps, and fish weirs, where known and available, can reduce the need for constant pursuit. The archaeological record rarely preserves the full range of perishable technology, because wood fibre hide and cord decay more easily than stone. That absence can make ancient people look more stone-bound than they were. What survives in the record suggests only the hard skeleton of a much richer toolkit. Shelter also changes meaning. A cave rock overhang, dense grove, wind-cut hollow or constructed hut can become the difference between survival and exhaustion. In ordinary weather, a camp may be chosen for access to food or water. In prolonged cold exposure itself becomes a resource problem. A place protected from wind saves calories. A dry floor preserves sleep. A smoke hole that works properly keeps a fire usable without choking everyone inside. Stones warmed near a hearth can hold heat. Hides brush bones, and branches can shape a temporary architecture of endurance. No single design applies across all regions, but the logic is constant. Shelter is not merely where people rest. It is where the body is allowed to spend less of itself. Movement becomes more deliberate as the winter tightens. Some groups may retreat toward areas with more diverse resources such as coasts, river mouths, lake edges, wetlands, or ecotones where two environments meet. These borderlands can be precious because they offer multiple possibilities at once. If land animals are scarce, there may be fish. If plants fail in one patch, another microclimate may still produce. If snow blocks open, country trees may provide fuel and shelter. Yet these refuge zones can also attract many groups, and abundance under pressure can become crowded. Scholars still debate how often climate shocks created refugia, where human populations clustered, but the concept is important. Survival may depend not only on leaving a bad place, but on finding a place with enough variety to absorb failure. The emotional weight of these decisions is almost invisible archaeologically, but it must have existed. A familiar camp abandoned in hunger is not just a practical adjustment. It may mean leaving the place where relatives died, where children were born, where stories belong, where stone scatters around old hearths like proof of continuity. Ancient people are not modern sentimentalists with written property deeds, but attachment to place does not require writing. It grows from repeated life. To move away because the land can no longer answer is to admit that memory for the moment is not enough. Contact with others becomes both more necessary and more dangerous. A hungry group may seek relatives or allies beyond its usual range. It may approach a neighboring band with caution, hoping for exchange marriage ties, shared hunting, or permission to pass. It may also encounter refusal. Scarcity can turn boundaries hard. A water source, a cave, a herd route, or a grove of remaining food can become contested. The evidence for specific conflicts during ancient climate shocks is difficult to prove without clear trauma patterns, settlement changes or weapon injuries, and no single explanation fully accounts for all social outcomes. Yet common sense and comparative evidence suggest that crisis can produce both cooperation and violence. Humans are capable of sharing under pressure and also of guarding what remains. Children feel the crisis in quieter ways. They may be carried longer because walking through cold costs too much. They may receive softer foods when adults eat tougher scraps. They may learn earlier which signs matter, because childhood in a hard climate leaves little room for useless knowledge. Play may still exist because children remain children even near hunger, but their play likely imitates survival, throwing, digging, tracking, carrying, watching. Older people may become teachers by necessity, keeping the young close to fire and memory while others search. A group protects its children not only out of affection, but because without them survival has no future shape. In this pressure, human adaptability becomes visible not as a heroic leap but as thousands of small revisions. A camp shifts, a tool is repaired differently, a plant once ignored is tested again, a route is changed by a day, a stranger's technique is copied, a story about a bad year becomes instruction rather than memory alone. The ancient winter does not create intelligence in humans. It reveals how much intelligence was already embedded in ordinary life. It shows that survival is rarely one invention, one migration, or one moment of courage. It is a pattern of adjustment repeated until the world either softens or the people find a new way through it. And beneath the pale sky, this is what endurance looks like. Not triumph, not certainty. A group gathers close to a fire that has taken too much effort to feed. Tools lie within reach. A portion of marrow is shared carefully. Someone studies the weather with a face shaped by years of observation. Someone else repairs a hide covering before the next cold walk. The land beyond the shelter is less reliable than it once was, but it is not empty of possibility. The people at the edge have not mastered the winter. They have only learned for one more day how not to be mastered by it. Long after the fires have gone cold and the people who watch the pale sun have vanished into ancestry, another archive keeps the memory of the ancient winter with almost inhuman patience. It lies far from the camps beyond forests and grasslands, in places where snow falls and does not fully leave. Year after year, storm after storm, flakes settle on old flakes. Their delicate shapes collapse under pressure. Air is trapped. Dust is sealed. Chemicals from distant skies become locked inside the growing ice. What was once weather becomes a layered record, and what was once disaster becomes a narrow trace in a frozen wall. Ice is not memory in the human sense. It does not grieve, exaggerate, or explain. It preserves without caring. That is why it is so valuable. In Greenland, Antarctica, and high mountain glaciers, scientists can drill deep cores and read the layers like a vertical calendar. Each band of ice can hold clues from a particular period: volcanic sulfate, sea salt dust, ash, particles, trapped gases, and tiny changes in chemistry that point toward temperature, circulation, and atmospheric disturbance. The people who endured the winter left few words or none at all, but the sky above them left chemical fingerprints. Those fingerprints sank into snow and waited. The most important sign of a volcanic winter in ice is often sulfate. When a major eruption sends sulfur gases high into the atmosphere, they spread, react, and eventually fall back toward the surface. In polar snow, this can appear as a spike in sulfate concentration. A thin section of ice may contain evidence that a volcano somewhere on Earth threw enough sulfur into the sky to dim sunlight across broad regions. If the same sulfate spike appears in both Greenland and Antarctic ice, scholars may infer that the eruption had a tropical or widely distributed source because its aerosols reached both hemispheres. If he appears mainly in one pole, the eruption may have been more strongly northern or southern in its atmospheric reach. The evidence remains incomplete, but the logic is powerful. A hidden eruption can leave a global signature. Sometimes the ice contains volcanic ash as well, microscopic shards known as tephra. These shards can be chemically analyzed and compared with known volcanic deposits. When a match is found, the ice core does more than show that an eruption happened. It can help identify which volcano erupted. This is difficult work because ash may be scarce. Far from the source, eruptions can have similar chemical traits, and not every ancient volcanic deposit has been fully mapped. Scholars still debate the source of some major sulfate events, and dating can shift as methods improve. Yet even uncertainty can narrow the mystery. The ice does not always name the mountain, but it often proves that the sky was wounded. One lesser-known detail is that ice cores preserve not only what erupted, but also how the atmosphere carried the aftermath. A sulfate layer is not a simple postcard from a volcano. Its thickness, concentration and spread depend on eruption height, sulfur content, latitude, season, atmospheric circulation and snowfall at the place where the ice formed. A large eruption does not always produce the same signal everywhere. A smaller but sulfur-rich eruption in the right location can leave a surprisingly strong climatic mark. This is one reason ancient winters are difficult to reconstruct with absolute confidence. The chemical spike is real, but the human experience beneath it must be inferred through many other kinds of evidence. Still, the ice offers something astonishing, a way to place ancient suffering into time. Without it, a cold period might remain vague, a blur of environmental stress somewhere in the past. With it, researchers can sometimes identify a narrow window when volcanic material entered the atmosphere. That window can then be compared with tree rings, lake sediments, archaeological layers, pollen records, cave formations, and signs of population movement. A cold year in wood, a sulfate spike in ice, and a disruption in settlement do not automatically prove a single cause and effect. Human history is rarely that tidy. But when multiple records point toward the same period of stress, the outline of the ancient winter becomes harder to dismiss. The ice also reminds us that catastrophe can be both sudden and delayed. The eruption itself may be a brief geological convulsion, but the sulfate aerosols it creates can linger long enough to disturb several seasons. In the ice, this may appear as one sharp spike or a cluster of layers depending on the event and the way snow accumulated. For people on the ground, the difference between one damaged growing season and several poor seasons can be enormous. A single difficult year may be survived through stored fat mobility luck or help from neighbours. Repeated failures begin to erode the reserves of landscape and society together. The ice cannot show hunger directly, but it can show the atmospheric conditions that make hunger more likely. There is a haunting contrast between the scale of the ice core and the scale of human life. A scientist may hold a section of core in a cold laboratory, a clear cylinder marked by faint bands, and inside it may be the residue of a year when children shivered beside fires and hunters searched too long across empty ground. The core is quiet. It looks almost pure, yet it may contain dust from deserts, salt from oceans, soot from fires, and sulfur from a volcano that changed the color of the sun. The disaster that once filled the sky can fit into a line thin enough to be missed by an untrained eye. This is why the ancient winter becomes more than a story of oral imagination. It becomes a case built from matter. The ice says that something entered the atmosphere. The chemistry says that it was volcanic in character. The spread of the signal suggests how widely the effect may have travelled. The datum provides a frame. From there, the human question begins again. Where were people living when the sky changed? What foods did they depend on? which regions cooled most severely, which groups had access to coasts, rivers, caves, or broad exchange networks, which archaeological layers show continuity and which show abandonment. No single explanation fully accounts for the human outcome, but ice gives the investigation its cold foundation. It also complicates popular visions of catastrophe. A volcanic winter is not always a single world-ending event. Many eruptions have occurred in human history, and most did not erase societies outright. Their effects depended on vulnerability. A major eruption striking a world of already stressed communities, narrow food systems, or unstable climate could have consequences far greater than the eruption alone might suggest. In deep prehistory, when written records are absent, this complexity matters. The ice can prove atmospheric shock, but it cannot by itself tell whether a group migrated, merged, starved, adapted, or barely noticed because local resources held. The frozen record is powerful precisely because it is honest about what it can and cannot say. As the ice layers accumulate year after year, the ancient winter becomes buried beneath later storms. New snow seals the old disaster deeper. Other eruptions leave their own marks. Dust rises and falls. Warm periods and cold periods pass across the planet. Human societies change beyond recognition. Farming spreads in some regions. Villages become towns. Towns become cities. Empires rise and vanish. Yet the pale year remains inside the ice, compressed and waiting a chemical echo of a sky that once failed. When scientists recover that echo, they are not simply studying volcanoes. They are reopening the atmosphere above lost human lives. The ice does not show faces around the fire. It does not preserve the decision to leave a valley or the fear of a summer without warmth. But it preserves the condition that made those decisions urgent. It carries the distant eruption into the present not as legend but as measurable trace. And from that trace the ancient winter begins to sharpen again, rising out of frozen silence as proof that the world can change far beyond the horizon, and that people on the ground may feel the consequences long before they ever understand the cause. Ice keeps the memory of the sky, but trees keep the memory of sunlight. They stand rooted in the exact places where climate touches life, directly drawing water through their trunks, opening leaves to the season, thickening by tiny increments when warmth, light, and moisture allow it. A tree cannot move toward a better valley. It cannot follow animals, seek shelter in a cave, or change its tools. It endures where it grows, and every year of endurance leaves a ring. In ordinary seasons, that ring may widen quietly. In a year of cold, drought, darkness, or stress, it narrows. Sometimes it becomes so thin that it's almost a whisper in wood. This is why tree rings matter so much to the story of an ancient winter. They are not dramatic at first glance. They do not look like ruin. A cross-section of an old trunk may seem like a pattern of pale and dark circles, beautiful but silent. Yet each circle marks growth shaped by a particular year. In favourable conditions, the tree adds more wood. In harsh conditions, it adds less. When many trees across a wide region produce unusually narrow rings at the same time, the pattern becomes a clue. It suggests that something larger than one hillside or one dry stream has interfered with growth. The tree does not know the word catastrophe, but its body records one. Dendrochronology. The study of tree rings gives scientists a way to build long timelines by matching overlapping patterns from living trees, dead wood, ancient beams, preserved logs, and sub-fossil trunks buried in bogs, lakes, or river sediments. A living tree may reach back centuries. A dead tree preserved in wet ground may extend the sequence farther. When its ring pattern overlaps with that of another sample, the timeline can be linked year by year, sometimes with extraordinary precision. This is one of the most powerful tools for identifying cold episodes in the past, because trees can mark not merely a vague period of stress, but a specific growing season that went wrong. The signs of volcanic cooling in trees often appear as narrow rings, frost damage, or unusual wood anatomy. In some regions, cold summers leave particularly strong signals, because trees near the edge of their climatic tolerance depend heavily on warmth during a short growing season. High latitude and high altitude trees can be especially sensitive. If the summer is too cold, growth falters. If frost arrives at the wrong time, cells can be damaged. In extreme cases, a tree may produce a frost ring, a scar within the annual growth that shows tissue injury from freezing during the growing season. Such details can point toward the kind of weather people may also have felt, not merely a hard winter, but summer touched by winter's hand. This is a crucial distinction. People often think of disaster as the coldest months becoming colder, but for food systems the growing season may matter more. A bitter winter is dangerous, yet a cold summer can sabotage recovery. It shortens plant growth, weakens seeds, delays fruits, reduces grazing, and prevents animals from building fat. Trees reveal that the ancient winter is not simply darkness in December or snow on distant hills. It is a wound in the season when life is supposed to repair itself. A narrow ring can therefore represent more than slow tree growth. It can imply thin pastures, poor forage, fewer nuts, delayed berries, and hungry animals moving differently across the land. One lesser-known detail is that trees can disagree with one another in ways that are scientifically useful. A tree in a damp valley may respond differently from one on a dry ridge. A species limited by temperature may show a strong cooling signal, while another limited by moisture may record drought or unusual rainfall instead. Some trees may be shielded by local conditions. Others may stand exposed to the full force of climatic stress. At first, this unevenness can look like a problem, but it becomes a map of complexity. It helps researchers see that a volcanic winter is not one flat blanket laid evenly over the Earth. It is a disturbance filtered through latitude, altitude, soil, water, wind, and species. When tree ring evidence is compared with ice core sulfate spikes, the ancient winter begins to gain shape. The ice may show that volcanic aerosols entered the atmosphere. The trees may show that a particular growing season then became unusually cold or difficult. If the timing aligns, the case becomes stronger. Still, scholars debate many details because a narrow ring can result from several forms of stress. Drought, insects, disease, competition, fire damage, and local weather can all affect growth. That is why broad patterns matter. One stressed tree is an anecdote. Hundreds of trees across different regions showing similar trouble in the same year become testimony, yet even tree testimony has limits. Wood survives unevenly. Some regions preserve long ring sequences beautifully, others do not. Tropical trees may not always form annual rings as clearly as trees in strongly seasonal climates. Ancient wood may decay before it can be studied. The trees that survive in the record may not represent all landscapes where people lived. The evidence remains incomplete, and no responsible reconstruction can treat tree rings as a perfect global diary. But within their limits, they offer something rare, a biological witness to the dimming of the world. For ancient humans, the suffering recorded in trees would have appeared in living form all around them. A forest that leafs out weakly is not an abstract climate signal. It changes shade shelter, browse fuel fruits, nuts, and the animals drawn to it. A stand of stressed trees may produce less mast-affecting birds, rodents, deer, boar, or other animals depending on the region. Smaller plants beneath the canopy may also be affected by cold and light. Dead branches may provide fuel, but widespread stress can also mean damp rot, poor regrowth, and less reliable shelter. The forest becomes a system of altered promises. In open landscapes, shrubs and scattered trees may mark the difference between a survivable camp and an exposed one. Their growth determines available wood tool handles, shafts, binding shelter frames and sometimes edible parts. If wood is scarce or slow-growing, people may travel farther for fuel or rely more heavily on bone dung peat or driftwood where available. This can change camp choices and daily labour. A narrow ring in a tree may seem far from a human hearth, but the distance is smaller than it appears. Wood that does not grow well becomes fuel that is harder to find shelter, that is harder to build, and tools that require more care. Tree rings also carry a quiet emotional lesson about time. A bad year does not vanish when it ends. It remains inside the trunk, enclosed by later growth. The tree continues if it survives, building new rings around the scar. In this way, trees offer a living metaphor for human endurance, though the metaphor should not be pushed too far. People are not trees. They move, remember, choose and suffer consciously. But both wood and culture can grow around damage. A community that survives a cold period may carry new habits afterward, just as a tree carries a narrow ring. The crisis becomes hidden within later life. As scientists read these rings, the ancient winter emerges not as myth, but as texture. It becomes a sequence of poor growth, frost injury, delayed recovery and regional difference. It shows that the sky's dimming reached down into trunks and branches. It shows that the crisis was not only atmospheric chemistry, but sunlight translated into wood, cold translated into hunger, and stress translated into a line so thin it can be seen only by careful eyes. The people beneath that weakened sun did not need tree ring science to know the year was wrong. They saw the living forest hesitate. They felt the delay in their hands, feet and stomachs. Much later, when the human voices are gone, the trees still hold the shape of that hesitation, ring after ring, a wooden record of the season when survival had to learn new rules. If ice remembers the atmosphere and trees remember the growing season, bones remember the cost paid by living bodies. They are quieter than ash, less orderly than rings, and far more difficult to interpret, but they bring the ancient winter closer to the people and animals who had to survive it. A bone can hold traces of diet, injury, age, movement, disease, butchery and stress. It can show how an animal was killed, how thoroughly a carcass was processed, whether people broke long bones for marrow, whether teeth formed during childhood hardship, and sometimes whether a population was eating differently than before. It does not tell a complete story by itself. The evidence remains incomplete, often scattered across caves, open camps, river deposits, and eroded landscapes. Yet in the fragments, the winter gains flesh. Animal bones are often the first witnesses. In a stable landscape, archaeological sites may show repeated use of certain prey reindeer in one region, horse in another, bison, deer, wild cattle, ibex, gazelle, fish, birds, shellfish or small mammals depending on place and period. These remains reveal more than what people preferred. They show what was available, what could be hunted efficiently, and what strategies were worth the danger. When climate shifts, the animal record may shift as well. Some species retreat, others expand, herd routes change. Cold-adapted animals may move into areas where they were previously less common, while woodland species may withdraw if forests weaken. In warmer refuges, the opposite may occur. The bones left behind become a rough map of moving ecosystems, yet bones can deceive if read too simply. A site with fewer large animals may mean large animals were scarce, or that people hunted elsewhere, or that the site was used for different activities, or that preservation destroyed part of the evidence. A sudden increase in small animal bones might show dietary stress, but it might also reflect a clever local adaptation or a change in season of occupation. Burned bones could indicate cooking fuel use, disposal ritual behavior, or later natural fire. Cut marks may show butchery, but absence of cut marks does not always mean absence of human processing. Scholars still debate many such traces because the archaeological record is a damaged record shaped by decay, erosion, scavengers, water, and time. Even so, certain patterns suggest pressure. When bones are smashed more intensively, people may be extracting marrow and grease more thoroughly. Marrow is rich, and in cold conditions fat becomes precious. A large animal carcass is not simply meat. It is hide for warmth, sinew for binding bone for tools, and fuel antler for points, organs for dense nutrition, fat for energy, and marrow hidden inside hard shafts. In difficult times, people may break bones into smaller fragments and boil or heat them to render grease, depending on technology and containers available. This behavior leaves distinctive traces in some archaeological settings. It suggests a world where nothing useful can be wasted. Human bones and teeth, when they survive and when ethical study is possible, offer another layer. Teeth form in childhood and can preserve signs of physiological stress such as enamel defects that develop when growth is disrupted by illness or malnutrition. Bones can show trauma infection workload and sometimes nutritional stress. Isotopic analysis can reveal broad patterns of diet, indicating reliance on marine foods, terrestrial animals, plants, or mixed resources. Ancient DNA can show population relationships movement, and sometimes demographic change, though preservation is uneven and strongly affected by temperature, age, and environment. None of these methods can look at a skeleton and say with certainty that one person suffered from one volcanic winter. But across many remains, patterns can hint at hardship, mobility, and changing life ways. There is a lesser-known detail in this kind of evidence. Absence can be a clue, but it is a dangerous one. A gap in occupation at a site may suggest people abandoned it during climate stress. It may also mean later erosion removed the layer, or that people shifted their activities only a short distance away, or that archaeologists have not yet found the relevant deposits. Deep history is full of silences that may represent either disaster or missing evidence. This is why careful interpretation matters. The ancient winter should not be turned into a simple story where every empty layer means death. Sometimes absence means movement. Sometimes movement is survival. Settlements, or more accurately repeated occupation areas, can reveal how people respond when resources falter. In some places, caves and rock shelters may show intensified use, perhaps because they offer protection from wind and cold. In others, open-air camps near rivers, lakes, or coasts may become more important, because they provide varied food sources. Tool-making debris can show whether people stayed long enough to repair and produce many implements, or whether they passed through briefly. Hearths can indicate repeated returns. Burned bone can point to fuel choices, especially in landscapes where wood is scarce. Layers of discarded shells may show reliance on coastal resources. Each trace is modest, but together they form a picture of people rearranging their lives around what the changed world still gives. Bones also reveal the vulnerability of animals themselves. Climate stress does not merely change where animals live, it changes their bodies. A harsh season can reduce fat stores, lower birth rates, increase juvenile mortality, or force animals into poorer grazing. Hunters may encounter prey that is easier to kill because it is weakened but less useful because it carries less fat. This is one of the cruel balances of survival. An animal dying from starvation may provide meat, but not the rich energy needed to sustain people through cold. Carcasses found naturally may attract scavengers and humans alike, but they may not solve the deeper problem. In a cold world, the question is not only whether there is food, It is whether the food contains enough energy to repay the effort of obtaining it. The human record may also show changes in mobility through raw materials. Stone tools made from distant sources suggest travel or exchange across broad areas. If climate pressure forces people to move the distribution of stone shells, pigments or ornaments may change. A group entering new territory may use unfamiliar local stone carry valued materials farther, or maintain connections with distant sources through exchange networks. Such patterns are not always easy to tie directly to one cold episode, but they remind us that survival is visible not only in bones, but in the things bones are found beside. A broken blade, a hearth stain, a pierced shell, a heap of butchered remains together, they make a human scene. The evidence in bones is perhaps the most intimate and the most frustrating. Ice can show a volcanic signal clearly. Trees can show a narrow ring in a specific year. Bones speak in probabilities, not simple announcements. They say that diets shifted here, animals changed there, bodies endured stress somewhere else. They suggest pressure without always naming its cause. No single explanation fully accounts for the patterns of survival, migration, abandonment, and continuity that appear across ancient sites. Volcanic winter may be one force among many climate instability, local ecology, population size, technology. Social ties and chance all shape the outcome. Still, the bones keep returning the story to the ground. They strip away the distant beauty of ice cores and the elegant precision of tree rings. They show cracked shafts, cut marks, worn teeth, healed injuries, butchered joints, and bodies that grew under stress. They remind us that climate history is never only about temperature. It is about the amount of marrow inside a bone, the distance to the next herd, the strength left in a mother's body, the ability of a child to keep growing the choice to carry an elder through snow because memory itself is a form of food. Under the ancient winter survival leaves marks not as grand monuments but as fragments. A scraped hide, a shattered femur, a fishbone near a hearth, a tooth marked by childhood hardship, a campsite used differently than before. These are not dramatic ruins, yet they are the ruins of decisions. They show people trying to turn a failing world into one more meal, one more night, one more journey, one more generation. And in that effort, preserved imperfectly in bone and stone and ash-dark earth, the ancient winter becomes not just an atmospheric event but a human ordeal measured in bodies. As the ancient winter presses across landscapes, borders begin to move, though no one draws them on a map. The border between forest and open grassland shifts with temperature and moisture. The border between safe and dangerous ground changes with snowflood and hunger. The border between one group's familiar territory and another group's refuge becomes less certain as animals abandon old routes and people follow what remains. Climate does not need walls to reshape the world. It changes the places where life can continue and the living must answer by moving, waiting, adapting or disappearing from the record. A habitable zone is not a clean line, it is a set of relationships. People need food, water, shelter, fuel-usable stone or other tool materials, and enough predictability to plan beyond the immediate day. Animals need forage breeding grounds, migration corridors, and protection from extreme exposure. Plants need warmth, light soil, moisture, and time. When volcanic cooling weakens the growing season and disturbs rainfall, these relationships tighten and loosen unevenly. A valley that once supported a seasonal camp may still contain water, but too little food. A coast may remain productive while inland herds fail. A cave may offer shelter, but sit too far from fuel. A plain may still hold animals, but only after a longer and more dangerous journey. The map of survival becomes patchier. For mobile human communities, patchiness changes everything. Movement is already part of life in many prehistoric societies. But there is a difference between planned seasonal movement and forced displacement. A seasonal round is built on expectation. People know where they are going and why. Forced movement begins when the expected place no longer gives enough. It may start modestly. A camp is shifted a few days earlier. A route extends farther north or south. A river is followed beyond the usual bend. But small changes can accumulate. One unfamiliar valley leads to another. One missed herd crossing pushes people toward a different basin. One failed winter camp makes an old route too risky to repeat. The world grows wider and less known at the same time. Animals are moving too. Cold-adapted species may push into lower or more southerly regions where conditions now suit them better. Woodland animals may retreat if forests thin or reorganize. Grazers may track the remaining productive grasslands. Predators follow prey, and scavengers follow death. Birds shift nesting and migration patterns. Fish respond to water temperature, river flow, and sediment changes. Human groups depending on these animals are pulled into the same restless system. They are not simply choosing movement from above like strategists looking at a board. They are part of the board moving because the pieces around them move first. This movement can create unexpected meetings. Groups that once occupied separate seasonal ranges may find themselves drawn toward the same river corridor, coast cave system, lake margin, or sheltered valley. Some of these encounters may be tense. Others may lead to exchange shared hunting into marriage, or the transfer of techniques. The evidence remains incomplete, especially when trying to reconstruct social relationships without written records, but archaeology repeatedly shows that prehistoric people were not isolated dots. Materials travel, styles spread, genes move. Ideas leave traces in stone, bone ornaments, and settlement choices. Climate pressure can accelerate contact by compressing people into the same livable places. Refugia becomes central to this story. A refugium is a place where conditions remain more favorable while surrounding areas become harsher. It might be a coastal zone buffered by the sea, a river valley with varied resources, a lake basin that gathers animals and plants, a cave-rich limestone region with shelter, or a southern landscape where cold arrives less brutally. These places are not paradises. They can be crowded, dangerous, and limited. But they offer diversity, and diversity is one of survival's oldest protections. If one resource fails, another may remain. If open country hunting is poor fish, shellfish, small game water plants, or stored materials may help fill the gap. Scholars still debate the exact locations and importance of different prehistoric refugia, but the principle is widely accepted. In unstable climates, varied landscapes can hold life together. The movement of borders also changes culture. A group entering new terrain must learn new stone sources, new animal habits, new plants, new hazards, and perhaps new neighbours. Old tools may still work, but not always perfectly. A point designed for one prey may need adjustment for another. Clothing suited to dry cold may fail in wet cold. A shelter strategy from open steppe may not fit dense woodland. Knowledge becomes portable only when it can be revised. This is where human flexibility becomes visible. People carry traditions, but they also edit them. A culture that cannot change at all becomes brittle. A culture that changes too quickly may lose what made it effective. Survival lies in the tense middle where memory and experiment work together. There is also a genetic dimension, though it must be approached carefully. Climate stress can reduce population size in some regions, isolate groups in refuges, or create new contact between previously separated populations. Over long periods, such patterns can affect ancestry. Ancient DNA studies have shown that prehistoric populations often moved mixed. vanished from particular regions or were replaced in ways far more complex than earlier archaeology could see. It would be too simple to claim that one ancient winter caused a single genetic turning point everywhere. No single explanation fully accounts for human population history. Yet severe climate disruptions may contribute to the pressures that make movement and mixture more likely. The winter does not write the entire human story, but it may push the pen. A lesser-known part of this moving border world is the importance of microclimates. Survival is not always decided at the scale of continents. A south-facing slope may warm earlier than a shaded valley. A spring-fed stream may remain open when nearby water freezes. A coastal inlet may shelter shellfish from rougher seas. A cave mouth may catch sun in winter, but stay shaded in summer. A line of cliffs may block the wind enough to preserve a camp's energy. Ancient people with their close attention to place likely understood such differences in practical terms. They did not need scientific language for microclimate. They needed to know where frost lingered, where snow melted first, and where animals came when the weather turned. As groups move, the meaning of home becomes complicated. Home may be a territory, but it may also be a sequence of returns, a network of known stops, a set of stories tied to ridges and waters. When climate disrupts that sequence, people may continue to carry home as memory while physically leaving it behind. This matters because migration is often described as a clean arrow on a map. In lived experience, it is more likely a series of reluctant decisions, partial returns, failed attempts, temporary camps, and new attachments forming under pressure. The archaeological record compresses this into layers and distributions, but the human reality must have been uneven and emotional. The moving borders of the ancient winter therefore create both danger and possibility. Hunger drives people outward, but outward movement can lead to new resources. Crowding can produce conflict, but it can also create exchange. A lost route can open another. A strange landscape can teach new methods. Some groups may fade from particular regions, leaving behind silence where hearths once burned. Others may emerge from the crisis with broader networks, altered toolkits, and deeper knowledge of varied environments. The same cold that narrows survival in one place may widen human experience in another. Under the pale sky, the world is no longer arranged according to old trust. Forest edges shift, herds drift, rivers become corridors of uncertainty, coasts gather life and danger together, valleys empty then fill with strangers. The ancient winter turns geography into a moving thing, and human beings must move with it not always by choice, not always successfully, but with an adaptability that leaves traces across stone, bone, genes, and memory. The borders that matter most are not drawn between nations because nations do not yet exist. They are drawn between enough and not enough, between known and unknown, between a place that can still hold a people and a place that can only be remembered. The mystery of survival is not that ancient people suffered through a colder world. Suffering is easy enough to explain when sunlight weakens, seasons fail, and food grows uncertain. The deeper mystery is why survival is so uneven. In one region, a group may vanish from the archaeological record for generations. In another, people remain changing their habits but holding their ground. Somewhere else, communities may merge or reappear in a new form, carrying old techniques into unfamiliar landscapes. The ancient winter does not strike every human group with the same force, and even where it does, the outcome depends on more than temperature. It depends on the hidden architecture of daily life. Some groups endure because their environment gives them options. A coast, a river delta, a lake edge or a varied woodland may buffer hardship in ways an open, single-resource landscape cannot. If large animals become unreliable, fish may remain. If plants fail in one zone, Another nearby zone may still offer roots, birds, shellfish, or small mammals. A narrow diet is efficient when the favoured food is abundant, but it becomes dangerous when that food disappears. A broad diet can require more labour and more knowledge, but in crisis it spreads risk. This is one reason archaeologists pay such close attention to the variety of remains found at sites. A heap of bones and shells may look like refuse, but it can also reveal the width of a survival strategy. Other groups endure because they are mobile enough to follow change without losing coherence. Movement is not simply walking away. It requires knowledge of routes, water shelter, neighbouring territories, and seasonal hazards. It requires social agreement because a group must decide when to abandon a place that still holds memory, but no longer holds enough food. It requires physical capacity because children, elders, injuries, tools, hides, and fire must all be carried in some form. A highly mobile group may escape local failure, but movement also consumes energy and increases exposure. A less mobile group may preserve shelter and local knowledge, but risk being trapped by scarcity. No single choice is safe. Survival often belongs to those who can change strategies without tearing the group apart. Technology matters, though not as a simple ladder from crude to advanced. A stone blade can be beautifully made and still fail to solve a food crisis. A simple digging stick can become essential if roots are the only reliable resource. A needle-awl-hide, scraper-cord net or container may leave less obvious archaeological glory than a finely shaped point. Yet these humble tools can decide whether people stay warm, carry food, trap small animals, repair shelter, or preserve embers. The winter reward's not the most impressive object, but the most useful combination of objects and knowledge. What survives in the record suggests that ancient toolkits were far richer than stone alone reveals, and much of the most important equipment has simply decayed. Social structure may be the hardest factor to see and one of the most important. A group with strong sharing rules can spread risk across families. A hunter who fails today may eat because another succeeded yesterday, and that same pattern may reverse tomorrow. Food sharing is not only kindness, it is insurance in a world where luck is uneven. A community that protects injured members, children, elders, and skilled specialists may carry more dependence in hard times, but it also preserves knowledge and future capacity. A community that fractures under pressure may reduce short-term burden, but lose the social network that made survival possible. Scholars still debate how to reconstruct deep prehistoric social systems because the evidence is indirect, but the importance of cooperation is difficult to avoid. There is a paradox here. In a crisis, dependence on others can seem dangerous because others also need food. Yet human beings survive in part because they are intensely dependent creatures. Infants cannot survive alone. Skills take years to learn. Large animals are often easier to hunt, butcher, transport, and defend collectively. Information spreads through relationships. A lone person may be flexible for a time, but a group can carry memory across generations. The ancient winter tests whether social dependence becomes a weakness or a weapon. In some places it likely becomes both. Chance also deserves a place in the story, though it rarely satisfies the human desire for explanation. A group may survive because it happens to be near a sheltered valley when the worst cold comes. Another may suffer because a key elder dies before passing on knowledge of famine foods. A herder may shift toward one camp and away from another for reasons no human can control. A fire may fail in wet weather. A child may recover or not. An injury may occur on the wrong day. Deep history often tempts people toward grand causes, but lived survival can hinge on small accidents. No single explanation fully accounts for who endures and who fades, because the past is made of climate, culture, ecology, and luck braided together. The mystery becomes even more complex when different kinds of humans share the wider world. Depending on the period being considered, Homo sapiens may not be the only human presence across Eurasia or nearby regions. Neanderthals, Denisovans and other archaic populations occupy parts of the human landscape at different times, each with their own adaptations and histories. Climate stress may affect these groups differently, depending on population size range, diet, technology, and contact. It would be irresponsible to claim that one volcanic winter explains the disappearance or survival of any human group by itself. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the timing and causes of major population changes. Yet severe environmental instability may have added pressure to populations already living close to the edge. Small population size is a quiet danger. A group can have excellent knowledge and still be vulnerable if there are too few people to absorb loss. Deaths from hunger, illness, accident, or conflict reduce not only numbers but skills, relationships, and reproductive future. If groups become isolated, finding partners becomes harder. If they merge with others, they may survive biologically while changing culturally. This may be one of the most haunting forms of survival. A people does not continue exactly as before, but pieces of them persist in genes, tools, stories, or techniques absorbed into others. The archaeological record may make this look like disappearance, while the deeper reality may be transformation. Food storage, where possible, changes the odds, but it is not always available in the ways later agricultural societies depend on. Hunter-gatherer groups can dry meat, smoke fish, cache bones, store nuts, preserve fat, or keep useful materials in known places depending on environment and technology. But storage has enemies: moisture, animals, insects, rot, theft, and the simple fact that a prolonged crisis can outlast any reserve. Still, even small reserves matter. A cache of dried food may allow a group to wait out a storm care for the sick or delay a dangerous move. In the ancient winter, survival may depend on such narrow margins, the kind too small to become legend, but large enough to keep people alive. Belief and memory also play roles that are difficult to measure. In a changed world, people need explanations not only for comfort but for action. A story about a previous cold year may encode practical guidance. A taboo may protect a resource from being overused too early. A ritual gathering may maintain alliances. A remembered route may be preserved in narrative form long after its original meaning is blurred. Modern analysis often separates practical knowledge from symbolic life, but ancient communities may not have made such neat divisions. The world of meaning and the world of survival likely overlap. A story can be a map. A ceremony can be a social contract. A memory can be a tool. The unevenness of survival is therefore not a flaw in the story. It is the story. The ancient winter rewrites human survival because it reveals that endurance is not one trait. It is a web. Environment, mobility, technology, cooperation, memory, diet, population size, contact, and chance all pull on one another. A group does not survive because it has fire alone, or stone tools alone, or courage alone. It survives because enough pieces hold at the same time. When too many pieces fail together, even skilled people can disappear from a place where their ancestors once lived well. Beneath the dimmed sky, the difference between survival and loss may appear almost invisible from the outside. Two groups may look equally strong at the start of the cold. Both have tools, both have fires, both know their land, but one has a coast within reach, one has allies beyond the ridge, one has elders who remember famine foods, one has children healthy enough to travel, one has a wider diet, one is lucky when the herd turns south instead of north. Years later, one trace continues in the earth and the other becomes a silence. The ancient winter does not choose with justice. It tests systems, and the systems that bend in enough ways carry human life forward. Fire is the first technology that makes the ancient winter less absolute. It does not end the cold, and it does not restore the sun, but it creates a small climate under human control. Around a hearth, the world becomes divided between the reach of warmth and the darkness beyond it. That division matters. A fire turns frozen fingers back into working hands. It dries hides, softens sinew, hardens wooden points, cooks roots, and meat frightens some animals away, draws people together and stretches the usable hours of the day. In a winter that seems to trespass into the wrong seasons, fire becomes more than comfort. It becomes the center around which survival is organized. Yet fire is never free. It demands fuel, attention, skill, and planning. A flame can die in wet wind. Embers can be lost during travel. Dry wood may be scarce buried distant or claimed by other needs. In open landscapes, people may rely on shrubs, dungbone, driftwood, or whatever else can burn well enough to keep a hearth alive. In forests, wood may be more available, but damp weather can make it stubborn. The work of gathering fuel expands in a prolonged cold period, and that labour competes with hunting-gathering tool, repair, childcare, and rest. The fire that saves energy also consumes it before it ever burns. This is why shelter and fire must be understood together. A hearth in the open wastes heat. A hearth inside a well-chosen shelter transforms the body's chances. Caves and rock overhangs can protect against wind and precipitation, but not every cave is safe, dry, or close to food. A constructed shelter of hides, branches, brush, bone, turf, or stone can be placed where resources demand, but it requires labour and material. A windbreak may be simple, yet in bitter weather even a simple barrier can cut the cost of survival. The ancient winter teaches that warmth is not one invention. It is a system, fuel, flame, shelter, clothing, body position, group size, and timing all working together. Clothing may be one of the most important survival technologies and one of the least visible archaeologically. Stone tools preserve well, hides and fibres usually do not. Because of this, the deep past can appear underdressed in imagination, as if people stand forever in rough skins barely protected from the elements. The reality is likely far more sophisticated. Scrapers prepare hides, awls and needles pierce them, sinew, plant fibre, or leather thongs bind them. Fur can be turned inward for warmth. Layers can trap air. Foot coverings can protect against frozen ground. Mittens, hoods, leggings and fitted garments may leave only indirect traces, but their importance is hard to overstate. A well-made piece of clothing is portable shelter. There is surprising intimacy in this technology. A spear point may be made for the moment of impact, but clothing is made for hours of breath movement, sweat, and cold. It must fit a body. It must flex at joints. It must be repaired when seams split. It must dry without shrinking into uselessness. It must balance warmth with mobility because a hunter wrapped too heavily may move poorly, while a child wrapped too lightly may not survive the night. The making of clothing requires patience, fine motor skill, and knowledge of materials. It is not secondary work. In the ancient winter, the people scraping hides by firelight may be doing labour as vital as any hunt. Food technology also changes the meaning of survival. Cooking allows people to draw more nutrition from certain foods and reduces the cost of digestion. Heating can make tough roots safer or easier to eat, though plant processing varies widely by species and region. Roasting bones, boiling fragments where containers allow, or heating stones to transfer warmth into water can help extract grease and marrow. Drying and smoking can preserve meat or fish in places where weather and technique cooperate. Even the ability to keep embers alive between camps reduces risk, because starting fire from scratch can be difficult in cold and damp conditions. The evidence remains incomplete for many perishable methods, but what survives suggests that ancient people understand transformation. Heat changes matter. Skill changes fate. Stone tools continue to matter not because stone alone defines human technology, but because it helps make everything else possible. A sharp flake cuts hide. A scraper cleans it. A burrin or bladelet may help shape bone or antler. A point brings down prey. A backed blade can be set into a composite tool. Stone is the durable partner of perishable invention. In a crisis, repairability may be as important as elegance. A tool that can be resharpened, reused, or remounted keeps value when raw material is distant. The ancient winter likely rewards efficient toolkits, not simply beautiful ones. A broken edge repaired at the right moment can matter more than an ideal object lost on a hunting trail. Shelter fire, clothing, and tools all depend on memory. None of them appears fully formed in a desperate hour. People know how to make them because someone learned, practiced, corrected, and passed the skill onward. A child watches the angle of a scraper against hide. A younger hunter learns which wood bends without snapping. Someone learns how close a hide can be held to smoke without ruining it. Someone remembers that stones from one source fracture better after heating, while another kind shatters dangerously. These details may never be written, but they are stored in hands. In a world without manuals, the body becomes the archive. Memory also includes failure. A group knows not only what works, but what once went wrong. A shelter placed too near a flood channel, a cache lost to animals, a plant eaten before proper preparation, a route taken too late in the season, a fire smothered by careless covering. Hard knowledge is often born from loss, and the ancient winter turns old losses into instruction. This is one reason elders can matter so much. Their value is not merely sentimental. They carry a longer record of mistakes and recoveries, including rare events that younger people have never seen. When the world behaves strangely, rare memories may become suddenly practical. There's no need to imagine ancient communities as perfect guardians of wisdom. People forget, they argue, they misjudge. Some traditions may become useless under new conditions. Some remembered explanations may mislead. But the survival system is stronger when knowledge is distributed. One person knows the plants of a valley. Another knows the behavior of animals during deep snow. Another repairs fine tools. Another remembers distant kin. Another can keep children calm and occupied while others work. Fire, shelter, and memory are not separate categories. They meet in the social body of the group. A lesser-known survival tool is rhythm. In a severe climate, the timing of tasks can save energy. Fuel gathered before full dark. Wet clothing dried before sleep. Meat processed quickly before freezing solid or attracting scavengers. Travel begun when snow crust can hold weight, or delayed when wind makes movement too costly. Rest taken before exhaustion becomes dangerous. Ancient people living close to the land must understand rhythm constantly, but the winter makes timing harsher. The wrong hour can waste strength. The right hour can open a path. As the pale season continues, these practical technologies create small islands of order inside a disordered world. A shelter holds warmth against wind. A stitched hide holds warmth against skin. A hearth turns raw food into strength. A tool edge opens a carcass before cold stiffens it. A remembered route leads to fuel. A story preserves a warning. None of this removes fear. None guarantees survival. But each element reduces the world's power to take life casually. The ancient winter, then, is not only a story of climate pressing downward. It is a story of human craft pushing back. The sun may be weakened by particles no one can see. The trees may grow narrow rings. The animals may move beyond expectation. But inside a shelter beside a carefully fed fire hands continue to work. A hide is scraped clean. A point is reset. A child learns how to hold a tool safely. An elder watches the flame and remembers a route used when snow once came too early. The winter rewrites survival because it forces every piece of knowledge to prove itself, and the knowledge that survives does not remain abstract. It becomes warmth, food shelter movement, and memory carried forward into another uncertain dawn. In the ancient winter, survival is often imagined as a contest between people and nature, but that picture is too lonely. A single body can endure cold for a time. A skilled hunter can track animals through snow. A gifted craftsperson can shape stone, bone, hide, and wood with patience. Yet no human being carries the full weight of survival alone for very long. The real human advantage is social. It lives in shared fires, divided labour, remembered obligations, borrowed knowledge, food, passed from one hand to another, and the quiet understanding that a person who is weak today may be strong enough to help tomorrow. In a world where the sun itself seems unreliable, the group becomes a technology. This social weapon is older than cities, older than written law, older than any palace or temple. It does not require walls or crowns. It begins with the simple fact that human life is difficult to sustain without others. Infants need years of care. Children need teaching before they become providers. Injured adults need protection until they heal. Elders may move more slowly but hold experience that cannot be replaced quickly. Skilled makers, trackers, gatherers, healers, and storytellers all contribute in different ways. The group is not merely a cluster of mouths to feed. It is a living system of abilities, memories, and relationships. When the ancient winter tightens the margins, that system is tested as severely as any tool. Food sharing is perhaps the clearest example. A hunt does not succeed evenly for everyone every day. One person finds meat, another finds nothing. One family has a child too sick to travel far. Another has stored fat or gathered plants. In good times, sharing may strengthen bonds and reputation. In bad times, it becomes survival insurance. The hunter who gives today may need help tomorrow after an injury, failed pursuit, or empty trapline. Such systems are not necessarily soft or sentimental. They can be governed by expectation status, kinship obligation, and memory. People remember generosity, but they also remember refusal. Under a dim sky, reputation may become as important as muscle. Sharing also reduces waste. A large animal killed in cold weather may keep longer than in heat, but it still must be processed, guarded, transported, and consumed wisely. Many hands can butcher faster crack bones more thoroughly dry, or smoke meat where possible, prepare hides, and carry portions back to camp. A group working together can turn one success into many forms of value. Meat feeds bodies. Fat sustains heat. Hide becomes clothing or shelter. Sinew becomes thread. Bone becomes tool or fuel. Antler becomes point. A solitary person could use some of this, but a group can transform more of the animal before scavengers rot or weather take it away. The same is true of gathering. Plant foods often require detailed knowledge and repetitive labor. Some roots must be dug from difficult ground. Seeds may need collecting, winnowing, grinding, roasting, soaking, or careful preparation. Nuts must be cracked and sometimes leached. Berries or fruits must be gathered quickly before birds, frost, or rot claim them. One person may know a patch. Many people can harvest it efficiently. Children can learn while helping. Elders can sort, teach, and warn. The social group turns scattered resources into usable food through coordination. What looks like simple gathering may actually be a complex choreography of knowledge and labor. Language sits at the center of this weapon, though it rarely fossilizes. Words can carry information beyond the immediate moment. They can describe where animals were seen, which ice is unsafe, which strangers were encountered, which plants cause sickness, which valley still has fuel, and which root took too much strength. A warning spoken at the right time can save more energy than any tool. A story can preserve a route across generations. A name for a place can compress history into a sound. The evidence for language in deep prehistory is indirect, but the complexity of human technology and social life strongly suggests communication rich enough to teach, plan, negotiate, and remember. In the ancient winter, speech becomes warmth of another kind. Storytelling may seem like a luxury when hunger is close, but it is not. Around a fire, stories organize memory. They explain why certain places matter, why some foods must be treated with caution, why a group once moved away from a valley, why strangers beyond a ridge are trusted or feared, why a certain season should never be underestimated. A story can bind people emotionally, but it can also store practical information in a form easier to remember than isolated instructions. Scholars still debate how far back specific symbolic systems can be reconstructed, because stories themselves rarely survive in material form. Yet the human capacity for narrative is deeply tied to learning and cooperation. In a crisis, memory that can be retold is memory that can travel. Kinship and alliance widen survival beyond the immediate camp. A group with relatives in another valley may have options when local resources fail. Marriage ties can create pathways between communities. Exchange can move stone, shell, pigment, food, ornaments, or techniques. Even occasional contact can matter if it provides news of conditions elsewhere. In a volcanic winter, information about where animals have gone, or where food remains, can be as valuable as food itself. A distant ally may not save everyone, and travel may be dangerous, but a remembered bond can open a door that a stranger could not open by force. Conflict remains part of the picture. Scarcity does not turn all people noble. A crowded refuge, a remaining herd corridor, a dry cave, a dependable spring, or a coastal harvesting place can become contested. Cooperation and violence are not opposites in human history. They often exist near each other, shaped by circumstance. A group may share with kin and guard against outsiders. It may trade one season and fight another. The archaeological evidence for specific conflicts during ancient climate shocks is often difficult to interpret, but trauma, weapon injuries, defensive site choices, and abrupt changes in occupation can sometimes hint at tension. No single explanation fully accounts for social behavior under stress. Human beings are flexible enough to form alliances and dangerous enough to break them. The social weapon also depends on trust, and trust is fragile during hunger. If food portions shrink, resentment can grow. If leaders or skilled hunters fail repeatedly, confidence may weaken. If one family is seen as taking more than it gives, old bonds can fray. If strangers arrive asking for access to resources, compassion may compete with fear. The ancient winter may therefore test not only bodies but fairness. Groups that manage tension without breaking may endure better than groups that fracture. This does not require formal law. It requires shared expectations strong enough to hold when the world outside becomes unreliable. There is a surprising survival value in care. Archaeological evidence from deep human history includes individuals who lived with injuries or impairments long enough to suggest support from others, though each case must be interpreted carefully. Care costs energy. Feeding someone who cannot hunt or gather appears in the narrowest sense inefficient. But human groups are not machines calculating only the next meal. A person who needs care today may have carried knowledge, raised children, made tools, maintained alliances, or provided emotional stability. Care preserves social memory and reinforces the expectation that members are not abandoned at the first sign of weakness. In a long crisis, that expectation can keep a group from dissolving into desperate individuals. Children are trained through this social world long before they fully understand it. They watch who receives food first, who speaks when danger is discussed, who repairs tools, who comforts the frightened, who knows the old roots, who is mocked for carelessness, who is praised for patience. The winter becomes a school in which every gesture teaches. A child who survives such years may carry not only memories of cold, but models of cooperation under pressure. Those models may shape how that child later shares food, chooses camps, warns others, and teaches the next generation. Survival in this sense is cultural inheritance as much as biological continuation. The ancient winter rewrites human survival because it exposes social life as a practical force. Stone cuts, fire, warms, hides, protect, but people make those things meaningful together. One person keeps embers alive while another searches for fuel. One repairs a seam while another watches children. One remembers a distant spring while another knows how to cross the ridge safely. One offers food and earns future help. One tells the story that keeps a dangerous place from being forgotten. The group becomes a shelter larger than any cave. Beneath the pale sun, this may be the most powerful answer humans give to the broken season. They gather close not only for warmth but for continuity. Their voices carry information through the dark. Their hands divide work that would overwhelm one body. Their obligations turn private luck into shared survival. The ancient winter may scatter animals, weaken plants, and dim the sky, but it cannot easily erase a species that has learned to store strength in one another. The social weapon is quiet, easily missed beside eruptions and ice cores, yet it is one of the reasons the story does not end in cold silence. The long cold does not end with a single morning of warmth. A broken climate rarely repairs itself as neatly as a door opening. The sky clears by degrees, the veil thins, sunlight begins to regain its old weight, but the land does not instantly become the land that people remember. Snow withdraws unevenly, rivers carry meltwater and silt through channels that may have shifted during the hard years. Plants return at different speeds. Some animal herds reoccupy old corridors while others settle into altered routes. Forest edges do not step back into place as if obeying a command. Recovery is a process, and like the disaster itself, it is uneven, local, and full of surprises. For the people who survive the first better season may feel almost unbelievable. Warmth comes, but trust does not return with it immediately. A group that has watched spring fail once may not easily believe in spring again. They may continue to gather extra fuel, travel cautiously, test old food patches before relying on them, and keep fallback routes in mind. Hunger teaches habits that comfort alone does not erase. Even when plants grow more strongly and animals fatten again, memory remains alert. The ancient winter may have passed through the atmosphere, but it lingers inside behavior. Landscapes after a volcanic winter can change in subtle ways. A cold period may weaken some plant communities and allow others to advance. A sequence of poor growing seasons can reduce seed production, alter grazing pressure, and affect the animals that depend on certain habitats. Heavy rains in some regions may carve slopes, flood low camps, or leave new sediment along rivers. Drought in others may shrink wetlands or concentrate life around remaining water. Fire regimes can shift if vegetation dries, or if lightning and human burning interact with stressed plants. The evidence remains incomplete because separating the effects of one ancient winter from longer climate trends is difficult, but the central point is clear. Recovery does not mean reversal. It means a new balance forming from disturbed pieces. Human routes may also remain changed. A group forced toward a coast during the crisis may learn the coast too well to leave it entirely. A band that once depended heavily on large inland herds may add more fish, shellfish birds, or small game to its seasonal pattern. A community that survived by strengthening ties with neighbours may keep those ties afterward, turning emergency cooperation into a broader network. A route opened by desperation can become a tradition. A refuge found during danger can become a repeated destination. What begins as adaptation may harden slowly into culture. This is one of the quiet ways ancient disasters reshape history. The catastrophe itself may be brief compared with the centuries that follow, but decisions made under pressure can persist long after the pressure eases. People who move do not always move back. People who learn new foods do not always forget them. People who exchange techniques during crisis may continue exchanging after abundance returns. Children raised during the cold may become adults who plan differently from those before them. They may store more travel, wider trust, certain shelters more deeply, fear certain seasons more sharply, or value alliances that older generations once considered unnecessary. The winter ends, but it leaves behind a changed imagination of risk. Archaeologically, this aftermath may appear as continuity in some places and transformation in others. A cave may show repeated occupation before, during and after the cold, but with changes in animal remains, tool types, hearth placement, or intensity of use. An open-air site may be abandoned and later reoccupied by people using similar or different techniques. A region may show new raw material movement, suggesting altered ranges or exchange. Some traces may look like cultural innovation, while others may reflect survival pragmatism rather than invention for its own sake. Scholars still debate how to distinguish climate-driven change from internal cultural development, population movement, and ordinary variation. Ancient people do not label their reasons for archaeologists. They leave patterns, and patterns must be read carefully. The slow return of animal abundance can bring its own complications. Herds that survive the cold may be smaller, more scattered, or concentrated in new areas. Predators may increase where prey recovers, creating new dangers. Human groups that clustered in refuges may spread outward again, but their territories may now overlap differently. A valley emptied during hardship may attract several groups once conditions improve. Old boundaries, if they existed in remembered form, may be contested or forgotten. A generation that grew up away from ancestral places may know them only through stories. Returning is not always restoration. Sometimes return means entering a familiar landscape as strangers. The biological aftermath may also unfold across generations. If populations decline during the crisis, recovery takes time. Fewer adults mean fewer births, fewer skilled teachers, fewer marriage partners, and smaller networks of exchange. A group may survive physically but lose techniques if key specialists die. Another group may merge with neighbours and preserve people while changing identity. Some populations may expand into spaces left thinly occupied by others. Ancient DNA has shown in broad terms that prehistoric population history includes repeated movement and mixture, but assigning any one shift to one climate event is often uncertain. No single explanation fully accounts for the genetic and cultural landscapes that follow. The winter is a force among forces, powerful but not solitary. Yet from the human point of view, the aftermath is not an abstract demographic adjustment. It is the season when children begin to grow stronger, when fires no longer need to burn quite as long, when skins dry more easily, when a hunt returns with enough fat to make the camp smell rich again. It is also the season when absences become clearer. People who died in the cold are not returned by sunlight. Places abandoned under hunger may carry old hearths, but no living voices. Tools left behind remain where they fell unless later hands find them. The relief of survival may be braided with mourning. The archaeological record rarely preserves grief, but it would be strange to imagine it absent. One lesser-known trace of recovery may lie in the way people intensify knowledge of marginal resources even after crisis passes. Foods once used only in hunger can become regular supplements. Techniques developed for scarcity can improve life in abundance. A method for processing tough plant foods, catching small animals, preserving fish, or rendering fat more efficiently may have been sharpened by necessity and retained because it works. This is not progress in a simple upward line. It is adaptation leaving residue. Hard years teach, and some lessons remain useful. The recovering landscape also changes the meaning of memory. During the cold, stories of older abundance may have offered hope or instruction. Afterward, stories of the cold itself become warnings. They may not preserve exact volcanic causes, especially without writing, but they can preserve the moral shape of the event. The year warmth failed. The time animals vanished, the journey to the water. The shelter that saved the group. The mistake that cost lives, the strangers who shared food. The valley that could no longer be trusted. Over generations, such memories may merge with other hardships, or become symbolic rather than historical. The original event may blur, but the behavioral lesson can survive. After the long cold, humanity does not emerge unchanged. It emerges with altered routes, widened diets, tested alliances, and a deeper awareness that the world can betray expectation. The ancient winter does not build a city or invent a language by itself. It does not hand humanity a new destiny in one dramatic gesture. Its influence is quieter and perhaps more profound. It pressures people to notice more, share more carefully, move more intelligently, preserve more knowledge and respect the thinness of the margin between ordinary life and crisis. The sun strengthens. The rings in trees widen again. Sulfate disappears beneath newer ice. Animals return to valleys where their bones may one day be found by hands that cannot know their names. Human camps spread outward, some to old places, some to new. The world is no longer under the same pale veil, but the people who endured it carry the winter forward in choices. Survival has not erased the catastrophe. It has absorbed it, and from that absorption the human story continues not as a clean recovery, but as a landscape of memory walking into warmer light. The winter that changed survival does not stand alone in the human story. It belongs to a much longer pattern of climate shocks, migrations, extinctions, adaptations and recoveries, stretching across deep time like faint marks on stone. Long before written history gives disasters names, human beings live through abrupt, cold, shifting rainfall, advancing ice, spreading drought, rising seas, and sudden volcanic darkness. Each event is different. Each touches different regions in different ways. Yet together they reveal a larger truth. Humanity is not shaped only by moments of abundance, but by the repeated necessity of enduring instability. The ancient winter matters because it compresses this truth into a sharper image. In a normal year, survival knowledge can look almost invisible because it works so smoothly. People follow routes, gather foods, hunt animals, repair tools, exchange with neighbors, and teach children without needing to explain the entire system behind each action. But when the sky dims and seasons falter, the system becomes visible. A route fails, a food source disappears, a shelter proves inadequate, a relationship becomes essential, a forgotten plant becomes valuable, a distant ally becomes the difference between remaining and leaving. Climate shock exposes the hidden machinery of human life. This exposure may have helped shape one of the most important human qualities, adaptability without total rootlessness. Human beings are not simply wanderers who can live anywhere by instinct. They become able to inhabit many environments because they learn them, name them, remember them, and build cultural habits around them. A frozen plain, a desert margin, a forest edge, a coast, a mountain valley, and a river basin all require different forms of attention. The ancient winter pushes this adaptability harder. It forces people to carry knowledge from one setting into another, to test whether old methods still work, and to accept new practices when old ones fail. What survives in the record suggests that human flexibility is not vague cleverness. It is practical, local, and often painfully earned. Migration patterns may be one of the winter's lasting echoes. Climate stress can open some routes and close others. Ice drought, water levels, vegetation and animal distributions all influence where people can move. A cold period may draw groups toward refuges, then allow later expansion when conditions improve. A river corridor may become a pathway because it offers water animals, plants, and orientation through unfamiliar land. A coast may become a lifeline because it provides food that is not tied to inland herds. A mountain pass may close under snow or become important when lower routes flood or dry. These movements are rarely simple lines on a map. They are braided paths made of need, memory, opportunity, and accident. The ancient winter may also deepen the importance of cultural exchange. When groups come into contact during stress, they do not merely compete for resources. They may also exchange ways of surviving. A technique for making warmer clothing, a method of preserving fat. A hunting strategy for different prey, knowledge of a sheltered valley, or access to a stone source can spread from one community to another. Such exchanges are difficult to see directly, especially when perishable technologies vanish, but shifts in tool traditions, ornaments, raw materials, and settlement patterns sometimes suggest wider interaction. Scholars still debate how to distinguish borrowing from migration, imitation from shared ancestry, and independent invention from contact. The evidence remains incomplete, but the principle is clear. In hard times, ideas can travel with unusual urgency. This is where the story becomes larger than one catastrophe. Human history is often told through great inventions, fire blades, clothing art boats, farming cities, writing. But invention alone is not enough. A technology must be maintained, taught, adapted, and placed into social life. A needle matters because someone learns to use it. Someone gathers material, someone values fitted clothing, and someone teaches the next generation. A net matters because people understand water fibers, knots, and fish behavior. A shelter matters because people know wind fuel bodies, smoke, and seasons. The ancient winter does not create these capacities from nothing. It tests whether they can be coordinated under pressure. It may also sharpen risk memory. Communities that survive a severe cold period may become more attentive to storage, mobility, alliance, and environmental signs. This does not mean every later tradition can be traced neatly to one ancient winter. Deep time does not allow that kind of easy certainty, but repeated climate shocks likely contribute to a human tendency to remember disaster through practical culture. A place avoided in one season, a food preserved for emergencies, a story about a failed migration, a rule about sharing meat, a custom of maintaining distant ties. These may all carry echoes of earlier instability. The original cause may fade, but the behavior remains. There is a biological legacy as well, though it must be handled with caution. Human populations passing through bottlenecks, expansions, isolation, and contact can carry the marks of those processes in genetic variation. Ancient climate stress may contribute to such patterns, by reducing numbers in some areas, concentrating people in refuges, or encouraging movement and mixture. But genes do not tell simple moral stories, and they rarely point to one dramatic cause alone. Population history is shaped by many forces at once: climate, disease, geography, social choice, chance, and long-term demographic trends. No single explanation fully accounts for the survival of some groups and the disappearance or absorption of others. Still, the ancient winter reminds us that the line of ancestry reaching into the present likely passed through many narrow gates. One surprising lesson is that survival may depend on diversity more than dominance. A group that dominates one resource may thrive in stable conditions but suffer when that resource fails. A group that knows many small resources, many routes, many neighbours, and many techniques may seem less spectacular but prove more durable. This is true at several scales. A varied diet cushions hunger. A varied landscape offers fallback options. A varied social network opens paths during crisis. A varied toolkit solves more problems. A varied memory gives more comparisons when the world behaves strangely. The winter rewards width. The ancient winter also changes how modern observers should imagine prehistoric people. They are sometimes described as if they live at the mercy of nature, passive before forces too large to comprehend. In one sense, they are vulnerable, and it would be foolish to romanticize their hardship. A failed season can kill. A cold night can take a child. A missing herd can break a group's future. But vulnerability is not passivity. Ancient people respond with intelligence, discipline, patience, and invention. They read signs, they adjust, they argue, choose, move, share, preserve, and teach. Their world is dangerous, but they are not merely victims inside it. The legacy of the winter is therefore a deeper understanding of resilience. Resilience is not invincibility. It is not the absence of suffering. It is the ability to continue changing without losing the thread of continuity completely. A group may leave an old valley and still carry its stories. It may adopt new foods and still remember old roots. It may merge with another people and still preserve fragments of skill and ancestry. It may lose individuals, places, and habits, yet keep enough of itself alive to become part of the future. Survival is often messy, partial, and transformed. As warmer years return, the ancient winter sinks into the background of time, but its influence remains in the widened human capacity to live with uncertainty. It teaches that seasons can fail, that distance does not protect a community from a faraway eruption, that the sky can change without warning, and that survival belongs not to strength alone but to networks of knowledge. It leaves no monument carved with its own name. Its monument is quieter, a changed route, a broader diet, a tool repaired differently, a memory kept alive beside a fire, a child who grows into an adult because enough people knew enough things at the right time. In that sense, the winter that changed us is not only a disaster in the past, it is part of the reason the human story remains so difficult to extinguish. Again and again the world alters the rules. Again and again people do not simply obey the first shape of loss. They search the margins, they carry embers, they follow rivers, they learn from strangers, they turn skins into shelter bones, into tools, danger into memory. The ancient winter rewrites survival because it proves that humanity's greatest inheritance may not be any single invention, but the ability to keep reinventing the terms of life when the sun itself seems to weaken. The warning from deep time does not arrive as a shout. It arrives as a thin sulfate line in ancient ice, as a narrow ring inside a tree, as a broken animal bone near a dead hearth, as a silence in a place where people once returned again and again. It does not tell the modern world that the past repeats itself neatly, because it does not. Every age has its own dangers, its own tools, its own blind spots. But it does show that human life has always depended on a balance more delicate than ordinary days allow people to notice. The ancient winter is frightening not only because it was cold, but because it revealed how quickly familiar systems can become uncertain. For the people who lived beneath that pale sky, the disaster was immediate and practical. It was not a lesson. It was a problem of food, fuel, shelter, movement, and trust. Yet from the distance of thousands of years, it becomes possible to see the larger pattern. A volcanic eruption in one place can change survival in another. A change in the upper atmosphere can alter rivers, plants, animals, and human relationships on the ground. A weakened summer can be more dangerous than a bitter winter because it steals the season meant to restore life. A crisis does not need to destroy everything to reshape everything. It only needs to narrow the margin long enough for old assumptions to fail. This is one reason the ancient winter still matters. It reminds us that climate is not background. It is the stage, the lighting, the timing, and sometimes the unseen hand moving the scenery before anyone on the ground understands what has happened. Ancient people did not separate weather from food, or ecology from movement, or survival from memory. Those divisions are modern conveniences. In lived reality, a dim sun becomes thin grass becomes lean animals become longer journeys become social pressure, and social pressure becomes choices that can change a people's future. The chain is not always simple, and scholars still debate the details of many ancient climate events, but the connection between atmosphere and human life is too deep to ignore. The warning is also about evidence. The past does not preserve itself evenly. Some stories are written in monuments. Others survive only as chemistry, pollen isotopes, ash scars, and fragments. The ancient winter teaches patience with incomplete records. A missing layer may mean abandonment or erosion or a camp not yet found. A narrow tree ring may mean cold or drought or several stresses at once. A sulfate spike may reveal an eruption, but not every human consequence beneath it. No single explanation fully accounts for the patterns left by deep time. The strongest understanding comes from many archives speaking together, each limited, each necessary. There is humility in that. Modern observers may want a single cause, a single eruption, a single year when everything changed. Deep history rarely offers such clean drama. Instead, it offers overlapping pressures. Volcanic cooling meets existing climate variability. Hunger meets population size. Movement meets geography. Cooperation meets fear. Technology meets the limits of material and energy. Chance enters quietly and refuses to leave. The ancient winter is not less powerful because it is complicated. It is more powerful because its effects depend on the whole web of life. A disaster does not strike a society in the abstract. It strikes the exact shape of that society's dependencies. The warning from deep time is therefore not simply that nature is dangerous. Ancient people already know that. The deeper warning is that stability can make dependence invisible. When seasons behave normally, when animals return, when rivers flow as expected, when plants answer the calendar, people may mistake a functioning system for a guaranteed one. The ancient winter breaks that illusion. It shows that survival is built on relationships that must be maintained between people and landscape, people and animals, people and tools, people and one another, memory and change. When too many of those relationships weaken at once, even a skilled species can be pushed to the edge, yet the same record that warns also refuses despair. The ice preserves disruption, but human traces continue above and beyond it. The tree rings narrow, but many trees grow wider rings afterward. Bones show stress, but they also show use, adaptation, and persistence. Camps shift, but fires return. Tool traditions change, but hands keep making. The ancient winter is a story of danger, but also a story of continuity under pressure. It does not suggest that survival is guaranteed. It suggests that survival is made repeatedly by decisions that may seem small until the world changes. A surprising lesson lies in the quietness of those decisions. Human endurance is often imagined through dramatic images: a great migration, a desperate hunt, a final stand against cold. Those moments may have existed, but the deeper work of survival is slower. It is someone repairing a seam before the wind rises, someone saving embers under ash, someone remembering a sheltered spring, someone sharing fat when hunger makes selfishness tempting, someone teaching a child which tracks matter, someone walking farther than usual and returning with news, someone deciding that an old place must be left before memory becomes a trap. These acts do not build monuments, but they build the future. The ancient winter also changes the meaning of human fragility. Fragility is real. A body chills quickly. Hunger erodes judgment. Children cannot wait for abstract explanations. A group can lose too many members. A landscape can fail. But fragility does not mean helplessness. It means that survival must be collective, inventive, attentive, and humble. It means that the smallest technologies can have enormous importance. A cord, a needle, a container, a remembered path, a social obligation, a shared fire. These are the quiet instruments by which a species passes through cold. In the end, the ancient winter does not leave one lesson carved cleanly into stone. It leaves a layered inheritance. It says that the sky can change beyond the horizon. It says that distance is not safety when the atmosphere itself becomes the messenger. It says that the living world is interconnected in ways that become most visible when damaged. It says that human beings survive not by standing outside nature, but by reading it, negotiating with it, and adapting when its old promises fail. It says that memory matters, but only when memory is flexible enough to meet a new world. And somewhere in that deep past, beneath a sun made pale by particles no eye can see, a small group rises into another cold morning. The fire is low, the ground is hard, the route ahead is uncertain, yet the people do not remain still. They gather tools, wrap hides. Close-lipped children carry embers and move toward whatever signs of life the altered land still offers. They do not know that ice will remember the sky above them. They do not know that trees will keep the wound of the season in wood. They do not know that far future minds will search their traces for the origins of resilience. They know only the next ridge, the next fire, the next shared meal, the next chance to continue. And in that narrow chance, human survival is rewritten. The ancient winter fades now into distance, as all winters eventually do. The pale sky clears from the imagination, the ash settles into the earth, and the long cold becomes a hidden line inside the planet's memory. The people who endured it leave no full account of what they felt when warmth returned. No carved sentence explaining the hunger. No preserved voice describing the first season that seemed generous again. What remains is quieter. Ice holds the chemistry of the disturbed sky. Trees hold the narrowness of hard growth. Bones hold the marks of bodies turned toward survival. Stone tools lie where hands once worked with patience, and old hearths darken the soil like small moons that have lost their light. Across deep time the scene softens. The frightened urgency of the crisis becomes part of a larger rhythm of earth eruption and recovery, cold and thaw, disappearance and return. Forests shift, rivers change course, coasts move, animals follow the green edge of the world, and human beings follow signs that never quite certain. the land that once seemed broken becomes livable again, though not always in the same way. The people who survive carry the winter forward, not as a perfect memory, but as altered habits, wider roots, stronger caution, and stories shaped around the knowledge that the world can change without permission. There is something strangely tender in that endurance. Human survival in deep time is not only the story of conquest, invention, or expansion, it is also the story of waiting beside a fire when the sky gives too little light. It is the story of repairing a hide covering by dim flame, of sharing food when no one has enough, of teaching children the difference between a safe path and a deadly one, of leaving a beloved place because life has moved elsewhere. It is a story made from small decisions repeated under pressure until a future becomes possible. The ancient winter reminds the present that civilization, memory, and survival all rest on fragile foundations, but not empty ones. Beneath every age lies the same older human gift, the ability to notice change, to gather close, to carry knowledge, and to begin again after the season of fear has passed. Somewhere in that vanished cold, a final ember is lifted from one hearth and carried toward another. Around it, breath rises in the pale morning. Ahead, the land is uncertain but not silent. The people move on, and behind them the winter sinks slowly into icewood, bone, and time,